At the beginning of our course, we must understand the software and the steps that it goes through in order for it to be delivered to the customer. And that's why we have something which is called the Software Development Lifecycle, or SDLC. The Software Development Lifecycle is the activities that are performed in order for us to develop a software for our customer. And it goes through a lot of steps. At the beginning, the customer has an idea, so he begins searching for a company that develops this idea for him. So at the beginning, the customer has some requirements. He tells us his requirements, and we begin writing them in a sequence of steps and in a good format. Then, the developers and the designers sit together and begin designing the software. How will we deliver the requirements to this customer? Then, we begin writing our code. We begin building the project. After writing the code and integrating it, here comes the testing part. We begin the testing, and while we test the software, we find defects. These defects are fixed, and then we release our product to the customer, hoping that he likes it. This is called a sequential development. Why do we call it sequential development? Because the steps are sequential. We don't begin any step until we finish the step before it. We must finish all the requirements, we must write them all in order to begin the design. Once we finish the design, we begin writing our code. Once we finish writing our code, we begin testing, fixing, and then releasing the software. But this is not the only way to deliver the software. We have two types of software development life cycles. The first is the sequential, which we talked about, and the second is the iterative and incremental model. Let's talk in more depth about the sequential models first. So like we saw in our example, the sequential model develops the software in a linear sequential flow of activities. In theory, there is no overlap of phases. Like we said, we don't begin the design until we finish writing all the requirements. But in practice, there may be some overlapping between these steps. We might be testing a part of the system while we are designing another part, and at the same time, the customer has a new requirement and he tells us about it, so we design it and so on. The sequential development life cycles have two major types. The first is the waterfall, and the waterfall goes like this. Like its name says, waterfall, because in the waterfall the water falls and it doesn't come back. So at the beginning we collect the requirements, we design the software, we write the code, we test, and then we release the software or deploy it. After releasing, if any problem happens with the customer, we perform maintenance activities. So this is the waterfall model, and it is considered as the most ancient model in software development life cycles. We made some modifications on the waterfall model and created the V model, which is also a sequential development model. In the V model, we divided the requirements into two types: the user requirements and the technical requirements, or the software specifications. The design also is divided into two types: the high-level design and the low-level design. And then we write the code. So the 5 steps on the left are the same as the first 3 steps in the waterfall model. Then comes the testing part. In the V model, we have more emphasis on testing. In the waterfall model, we had only one step, which is called testing. Here we have 4 levels of testing, which are unit testing, integration testing, system testing, and acceptance testing. We will talk in more depth about the levels of testing in further sections in our course. So these are the sequential models. Then we have the iterative and the incremental model. The incremental model means that we develop our software in increments. We finish a part of the software, we gather its requirements, we design it, we develop it, and we test it. Then we move to the next section and perform the whole life cycle on this section, and so on. And this is what we see in the first example here. The painter painted a part of the photo. Then he painted another part, then a third part. So this is incremental model. But in iterative model, we divide our software into iterations. So at the first iteration, for example, we draw our painting with only pencils. Then we add a layer of colors. Then at the final iteration, we add all the colors and finish our painting. A very important note that we may have a model which is iterative and incremental at the same time. And the most famous example on this is Scrum. Scrum is an iterative and incremental model which is considered as an agile methodology. So in Scrum, we have a small iteration or a small sprint. It may be 1 week, 2 weeks, or 4 weeks. At the beginning, we collect the requirements and we call them the product backlog. And then in each iteration, we take some features from the product backlog and finish them inside this sprint or this iteration, which is called the sprint backlog. At the end of the iteration or the sprint, we deliver some increments to our software. So here, we divided our software into iterations or sprints, and in each iteration, we developed some increments to our software, and that's why Scrum is considered as iterative and incremental model. We will talk more about Scrum in the Agile section of our course.